be Think and Grow Rich, it can be any book, it can be the Bible, but you change, and we have the ability to change our landscape, change our soils, change each other if we change. But go ahead and go to the next slide if you would, and I'll just kind of do this here. I kind of just wing it off slides, and they remind me of what we're doing. So this video here, this was probably one of the scariest days that I've had in my life. 2018, this was my first field day with Constant Canopy, and I planted wheat with our manure applicator that year, and our beans grew taller than the wheat by about a foot or two. And I invited everyone out here to watch me harvest this, and I honestly, the night before, I was breaking soybeans, and I thought it was going to be a huge failure. But we don't really learn anything unless we put ourselves in a position to fail. And it can be a little bloody sometimes, but I always tell people, you know, that's part of the learning process, and it's important to do things cheap and small and a lot of different ways to learn. I guess that video is not changed. If you move to the next one here. So, with my background in being a landscaper and kind of getting ripped out of that arena into farming, I had a different comfort level than a lot of other farmers that I kind of joined in the ranks when I started farming. I was more comfortable with canopy, with grass, with ornamentals, with mulch. And the idea of this scorched earth monocrop, when I started running into the problems of getting too big of a rain or the weed pressure and that kind of stuff, I really started searching for alternative farming methods. Are we being able to move these slides? There we go. So this goes along with the Bob Proctor idea. I've been doing the speaking deal for 5 years now. I ran into Burlington, Colorado. I ran into this guy, Brad Wingfield, and I sat in the back of the room. He did a little intercropping deal there, and I was tickled pink because he ripped the duals off his John Deere combine. He was raising 60-inch wheat, intercropping soybeans. But I learned something significantly sitting in the back. What Brad did with the system was he figured out how to integrate cattle into it. If you can move the slide along here. He had pivots, which I don't have pivots. But what you do see in this system is a lot of volunteer wheat or volunteer rye or whatever it is you're growing. And that can be hindering to your harvest. It's not really that big of a deal if you harvest it at the right hour of the day, if you will. But this green right here had caused us trouble. But what Brad was doing was when he would harvest the wheat, he would turn his pivots on and really get that volunteer wheat growing. And the pads that I used, you can go to the next slide here. He got the flexi finger pads like I was. This is 2019. And these pads protect the soybeans. You'll see the video. But he took the pads and he switched them position to where he protected the forage, the volunteer, and he intentionally, if you go to the next slide, harvested his soybeans up a little bit, which we do just to make it easier. But we always get this big volunteer cereal here, and then we can raise our soybeans and we lose maybe a bushel or 2 or 3 depending on where we're at. But think about that. If you protect that forage and it's even bigger, and now I've got these beans out here. He's putting his mama cows out here after harvesting the soybeans in late October, and he's getting huge gains off of that forage that was not bought cover crop seeds. So he's getting wheat that he's going to the FSA office and saying he's harvesting, or he's planting half of his acres, but he's getting 90 or 100% wheat yields. He's getting half of his acres on beans, but he's getting 90 or 100% from genetic expression. And then he's putting his mama cows out there and getting huge gains. So using 2 annuals and the forage taught me something that I want to integrate on me. And that idea is, just like with the Think and Grow Rich idea, now that I've seen this, my uncle has a herd of cattle. So there's no reason, if we go through the slides here, kind of ran them through here, there's no reason we can put, collars on them to move them. I'm affiliated with a feedlot that we source cattle on with the meat company. If you keep rolling here, We can take those carcasses, cut steaks and hamburgers, and get them in our restaurants and our consumers, which helps Hoosier Steaks as a brand and a story, subscription business. With stock cropper, we can take those hens, and whatever we have left from that carcass, we've figured out a system that we can render down the tallow, which you get a lot of beef fat and fat cattle, and we render down the fallow, and we're starting to feed our hens the rendered down meat, and they produce more eggs, which we can sell in our AFN. And I can just keep going on, but the more people that you can connect with, the more nuances and little wrinkles that you can kind of add into your system, the more entities that you can empower. That's the thing we need to be thinking about is with these projects, you don't have to be large if you're efficient and you have a lot of them going on. So that's my kids and his friends. That's Liam and Case there on the left. And that was our stock cropper project, which we'll get into here a little bit later, if you can continue on here. And that's the candle wax. So that's another byproduct. If we render that down, we feed the render to the chickens, we get all this tallow that we can put into candles and create other products. I saw the soap on the table, which was pretty interesting. If we can continue on here. There's the chickens eating the rendered down beef. And it's really interesting with these chickens. The more protein you get in their diet, the more eggs they will produce. If we can continue on, keep going here. And then the stock cropper has evolved. So now that we're figuring out a more viable way on the hen side, I really like the hen side versus the chicken side because I can keep them alive for 3 or 4 or 5 years to produce eggs. And this is the 7th iteration of stock cropper, the Pico, which is a movable hen mobile, which we'll get into how we can use that in a field concept. There's the steak and eggs. And I've tried to lower that down. I ate way too many steak and eggs for a while, but they are very good. Okay, so this is my Twitter page. And when I started doing it, my wife told me I was doing it all wrong because it's just for like slap happy jokes. And I would get on there and put 2 minute and 20-second farming videos because that's how long a video I could put on there. And I just kind of shared my journey of learning. I was excited about this stuff, and I still am today. And it has opened up so many doors to connect with people for a lot of these projects. But probably the biggest value that I get is the attraction from younger people. I was talking about that earlier. I really had some very sharp interns come to our organization. We give them autonomy, and if you can get somebody that truly cares and wants to understand our end goal and how things work, they're going to be orders of magnitude more valuable to your organization. And that all starts with sharing what you do. Yep?
The slide projector went down.
Oh!
But if you watch the TVs, the slides are on there.
Okay, we'll do that.
So I'm sorry.
Okay.
They have bad.
Can you still move the slides?
Yep.
Okay.
Coming back up.
So this is a little tough without the slides here. So we started this deal called Farm Weird, which was honestly my wife's idea about 5 years ago. We're back. And this is a farmer in Pennsylvania. So we've got farmers all over this country and different countries trying these concepts of basically a living root all the time, moving animals, intercropping, just the idea of can we get away from monocrop, couple crops, more diverse rotations, build the soil and start connecting with the community. And this is Ben's idea of 60-inch corn with alfalfa covers. He's also doing the barley and wheat, barley intercropping. We can continue on here. These are the kids. They're all into the Farm Weird. And Case is completely different than his brother. He's the youngest. I think he is a mountain goat of some sort. No matter what it is, we can get his the trot or my shoulders. Continue on this slide. We got to show this one here. Go to the next one here. He's figured out that if he gets up, he can increase his angle and really get that far, and he really shows up. But we did this project. My wife teaches, so she's off in the summer, and she said, "We're potty training our oldest this summer, and I don't care, it's going to happen." So we did a project in our garden, and I was into intercropping of the third year. I wanted to demonstrate genetic expression and what we could do with it. So we took this corn plant out of the field right when it emerged, put it in the garden, and I made an area about the size of that table where nothing was growing. And I told my oldest, let's just use this for target practice. So we just kept peeing on that corn plant every day. That's just kind of our little deal. And they're half naked anyway in the summer. And I was surprised how many, what would you guess that a corn plant, how many ears could it put on? Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 maybe. Well, this plant, it kind of tasseled like Gary Coleman. It was about 4 foot tall. And it grew out all these nodes. And I noticed about the end of June that all these corms were growing on all the nodes, and then the silks came out. And then the ears came out, and the ears would grow leaves, and we would get 2 ears on every node. And we ended up with 31 ears off this one corn plant. Now, I'll attribute the space, but organic phosphorus from urine is always good. But that should open your eyes to the ability for a person, a plant, an animal to genetically express in its ability. We're always looking at an acre of how much can we push in corn, and we need it 2 1/4 inch planted and banded, and we need this expensive planter to have everything perfect. But if we look at the true first principles of growing anything, sunlight, water, nutrients, and the availability of it. So it's when you look at annuals, aside from perennials, we're going to be much more productive if we look at life cycles and how we can place plants in specific venues to express and then not really ding and help a venue for the next crop. So this was kind of the beginning, and this actually motivated me to make my hog manure wheat planter because we knew we could really express the wheat that way and grow it for next to nothing. If you could move on the slides here. So this is my grandpa. I still farm with him. It's getting tough. He's nearly 90. He had a stroke. He had cancer. We're in the last, hopefully he stays around for years to come. But he's slowing down a little bit there on the left. And the next one. And then the other side was my Papa Lou. And I got a funny story I like to share about my Papa Lou. He had the most amazing hearing aid. And, he wouldn't hear anything. And it was important to this generation, horsepower was everything. The reason why my other grandpa couldn't hear was the 50-20 that he bought in the early 70s. He just didn't have enough power to pull the 6-bottom plow beyond 4th gear. So he ripped it out, put a Detroit diesel in there, and you could hear it from 10 miles away. But he couldn't hear anybody 20 years later. But the point is that was everything to this mentality, this factory industrial mentality where everyone's producing the same commodity. Comes down to how wide is your implement, how fast can you pull it, can we get this chemical that segregates everything out to scale it. So the thing that got really frustrating for me, and I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here, but when I came back to the farm, I felt like I had to prove to everyone that I was valuable, so I just worked myself to death. And I was very frustrated in, I'd go out and plant the whole farm, get everything caught up, and then, I was tired, and it'd be Tuesday, and Grandpa would be like, well, are you going to sweep this bin out? And I'm like, well, I just worked 100 hours in the last 4 days. You can't ever outrun, farming, and we just seem like we always got to pick up that next piece of ground to scale to survive. So another idea is, instead of figuring out how to scale, how can we empower as many things in the community, our plants, our soils, and let them, do most of the work for us by creating venues. If we can continue on here. That's my Papa Lou there that had the hearing aid. And he was an innovator in narrow corn, ridge till, he did about everything. interesting guy, just never really connected with him. I learned a lot from him of his lack of family, unfortunately, but anyway. If we can continue on, I'll kind of get in. This is an interesting picture going off of that tangent of this is 1953. If you want to find Munsee meats on a map, you look at Google Earth, you find Munsee, and you find this big white spot. And that's the concrete from this Chevy factory. 200 acres of concrete in Munsee that employed nearly everyone, and all that industry is gone now. But that was that mentality, that industrial efficiency mentality that the previous generations really worked in. And I understand it. It's part of our wealth, but moving on. And this is my grandma Heaton. She kind of gave me the love of gardening, and she had the biggest raspberries, and her secret was she would take the horse crap and put underneath them in the wintertime, and phenomenal pies, lard, all the good stuff. Continue on here. And this is my father. So this is the man that died of pancreatic cancer, and this was his learning idea. I remember when I was 12 or 13, him moving out of the semi seat and saying, "You're driving home." And I didn't know how to drive a stick shift, let alone a semi. But you're never going to learn anything by not doing it. And this is one morning he threw me on a cow, and he probably twisted his tail or something to see if it could knock me off. But he was just kind of that guy of doing his learning. Move on here. And this is who I farm with, mostly my cousin Neil and Dad. So let's move on to the cereal part of Mike Leach. Did you guys follow him? Another great man that passed. And if you would study his offense, it's all about spacing and sequence. So he could take a team of less talent and beat really good guys. We had this quote, we're going to die anyway, so live dangerously. So if you wanted to explain why I do all these projects and why I have a crazy demeanor, my dad passed. My uncle, that was Lewis's son, the only son that farmed, he passed, both at 53, within a couple of years. So the two key employees of the entire two families passed at 53 of cancer, pancreatic and brain cancer. So I just kind of have this idea where I enjoy life and enjoy everyone else's company, and I enjoy learning. And I think, hopefully I'm just trying to get that mentality on as many people as I can. Continue on there. So, this is my dad's favorite tree. It's my favorite tree. It's such a great example of genetic expression. This tree's probably 150 years old. That branch goes all the way out to our house. If we continue on, that is just, there was a commercial on the radio. A giant oak is just a little nut that held its ground. And that's how anything gets started. Is a seed. But look at that tree and compare that tree to a tree in the forest. It's going to grow completely different. The tree in the forest is going to compete. It's going to grow taller. It's going to be skinnier. It's not going to have enough sunlight, CO2, and all the goodies that this tree enjoys. Now, how can we create venues in our field to get all trees out there? So go on here. There's the nut. Keep going. I've got 200 slides, so we got to run through here. There's my wife. So there's tree rings. These are years that are passing, and if you look at a soybean plant, a corn plant, you're going to have a lot of nodes stacked where there's drought. Then you got rain and they stretch. Everything that's alive tells a story, just like a tree. Those are all years. We got to start thinking in life cycles and sequences. Continue on here. Weather systems, seashells, they all have the same pattern. I call it, you call it Fibonacci or spiral, the golden ratio. Any hurricane that gets strong, it's going to align in this pattern here. Go on here. So we do a lot of different projects on our farm, and I'll invite you guys to our field day, early July probably. Continue on where you can go out and see it like you did here. So, little tangent on that last story there. When I was a landscaper, instead of spending money on advertising, I had these things called living billboards. So we took care of probably 50 properties, commercial properties, and I took a lot of pride in our living billboards in front of the sign. And what I learned is I could be very cheap. So I would buy my flowers in April, plant them between tulips and pansies and my spring flowers, allow them to root in while it's raining and it's cool. Then I pluck my spring stuff out. If you look at this thing, this is one Dusty Miller that was probably 6 cents in a pack of 64 plants. So I could figure out if I could plant these plants and have diversity, I could look at the color, the size, the shape, and you could start layering things where I knew the petunias were going to be these colors, these are white, the cannas are in the back, the salvias. This is kind of the God Bless America living billboard. So that's what I'm used to when I went into farming. So if you continue on the slides, when you start looking at the attributes of these crops, you can change how they're going to grow, changing the venue. And I still don't know where this is. There's mountains in the background. But if you look at the wheat on the left, that's linear sun capture. It's also a life cycle. So we know that wheat's going to go through senescence, the cereal, in June. It's going to die and dry. And we're happy planting double crop soybeans into it. But if you look at first principles, what are we doing on our most valuable days, which would be right now? We're just waiting on the cereal to dry down. We don't have no new growth. We have no photosynthesis going on. Other thing you notice here, to the right, we just got lavender planted in probably 100-inch rows. Look at the shape of this sun capture. We can make the wheat grow just like the lavender. But if you would track a tape measure from the side over the top to the other side, we create that shape of 1.618, the golden ratio. The reason why it's not 1.57, a half circle, is the relativity is the sun. So it's going to stride out, whether it's a tree, a plant, or anything, it's going to stride out on the south side. It's going to be steep on the left side. So if you look at the shape of that, if we can plant, you can continue on the slides here. This is normal double crop. Completely dead. Relay. We put the wheat in wider rows, and we make the wheat change how it grows, just like the lavender. So I've got a 22-inch floor. I've got a gap. The wheat grows out. It wants as much sunlight, CO2, and water as possible. So the roots will grow out. The side tillers will grow out, and I create that shape. The value is in getting something else started. Because the thing with the golden ratio Fibonacci is the sequence. It's the two numbers added up. So it's 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And the point is, if in intercropping, relay, or starting anything, if you can get started, you can learn and gain confidence. If you get something started in the plant, I'm going through the low value sequences while the other crop is expressing, and when it's going through senescence, my sequence is gaining value, and then when I remove the wheat, now I have another crop that's potting out, that's further ahead in the sequence. So if I were to plant those soybeans July 5th, I would need 300,000 seeds. If I go back and I have a bigger plant, I can plant 100,000 seeds. I have 2 or 3 or 4 times the yield potential in an earlier planted seed. So the last 8 years has really been figuring out spacing, fertility, seeding rates, so that we can maximize and milk the curve of one crop and not ding the other thing. Continue on here. And this is where we'll be right after harvest. So those pads will come in, and I need to watch my mind. The pads will come in, protect these soybeans. We kind of create a Ziploc seal. Now we create a better environment for the soybeans than I would argue even in a monocrop situation due to the edge effect. And also we're looking at the roots of the soybeans growing in the roots of the cereal. So if I were to have adverse weather, I can control the wind, I can control the sun and shade a little bit. And if I get a lot of moisture at once, my soybean roots can now breathe instead of kind of slough off and die, which we've seen a lot of times in our monocrop soybeans when we get a 5-inch rain. You know, we'll have some big spots of yellow soybeans. very easy to have uniform standards. We can continue on here. Just a picture of the house. Again, canopy is what makes me comfortable, but I love creating venues for future value. And when the kids came on, I was looking forward to this day now where they're out barefoot, playing golf, battling each other every day. And until you create that venue and put it into work, you're not going to have that option. Keep going through here. So also with that landscaper mentality, think about diversity and attributes and things that we can do when we're growing that wide row wheat. Our family has 12,000 hog spaces. We have a lot of hog manure around our barns. And that created this huge problem when I first started farming, where we would get water hemp just coming crazy out in the summer. We always had chickweed, henbit. We always were dealing with weeds. It was just, weeds are just nature's ambulance. It's just like we gotta start photosynthesizing something. We gotta feed ourselves. So we can take that wheat and plant it how we want it, and then we can add turnips, radishes, oats, something like that will take that energy from the manure, grow, cycle the nutrients back to the wheat, and actually kind of give it some vigor going into the spring. Very interesting system if you get in this a broadleaf like that little winter keel. You can really control those winter annual weeds with that. Also, if you start figuring out the principles, whether you're controlling weeds with rye or something like that, your hands are no longer tied to what you can grow. And one thing that it took 2 or 3 years of getting this, but we would intentionally grow rye. We started doing some pumpkin patches, and I noticed that it takes a long time for the pumpkins to canopy, so we started growing sweet corn in 10-foot rows and twin rows, planting the pumpkins in June into the rye, and then inviting the community to come out and you pick both of them. So we can kind of market the pumpkins when people are out there picking the sweet corn, and that system has worked pretty well. Continue on here. So, I'm talking about a lot of people that have passed and a dog. I love Bogey with all my heart. He just passed this winter as well. He was my Vanna White, if you will, to go through the years when I was learning this. Just go through these slides here. This is a sequence of events. So you got your wheat expressing, vegging out, then you go through senescence, and this is just a beautiful time period, and this is what I was talking about earlier. We have these 14, 15-hour days. We're getting a lot of precipitation most years this time of year. If we can add a new living crop that is actively growing, has plenty of light, then we can get nearly the same yield and nearly the same yield of that if we think about and are intentional with how we do it. Continue on. And this is that new venue that the soybeans will change how they grow. And I'll get into that here in a bit. Keep continuing on here. Keep going. See how they fill in. We'll play this video here. I don't think we just played earlier, but this was, again, 2018. Look how big my beans were. They were actually a foot over the wheat. But I get a kick with our specific situation. I have all this manure. We have to apply it in the fall. We have to apply it in the spring. So how can we grow wheat for less than paying a dragline guy a penny a gallon to pump it? So this was the result of planting the wheat with a manure tanker, 1/8 of the wheat seed, because I knew it tilled really hard. And what happened that year, it snowed in April several times. It got real hot in May. The wheat was stunted somewhat. The beans grew really tall. And we had 108 bushel soybeans that year. And I've never been able to raise 100 bushel beans doing it the best that I ever could the one way. And it was really interesting looking at the attributes of what happened here. Yeah, we got a little bit of green in the combine. We haven't had a year thus, since where we've had this big of beans. But it kind of showed you that you can do it. Interesting thing, when you look at a different angle here, look at the reflection. So if you look to the left, you see that wheat that we're pushing down. So we're turning the cereal from a consumer of water that's going to grab that sunlight, feed the soil, catch the rain on the sides of the hills. Just having something physically growing is going to help, even if your soils are right. So you're catching that, you're consuming the water, you're creating a better venue for the soybeans. But now once we remove that biomass, now I have all these soybean leaves that would, in a monocrop situation, they would be down in the shade, and they're no longer viable. But when you open up that light to them, they change their mode of how they grow. So no longer are they competing like that tree in the forest. Now they can branch out. Each node is empowered, and we just see a significant difference in how our beans grow in a relay situation. We get a lot more nodes, we get stacked nodes, and if we get enough precipitation, we can definitely grow better soybeans, especially in the better soils than our monocrops. So we're just going to kind of go into the exact system that we've kind of evolved to in the last 8 years and how we've scaled this up on our farm. So first off, with the combine, we've got 3 combines on our farm. We've got the big one that does most of our acres. We've got a real small one, a 4420, and then this one is for relay and kind of help out the other combine. But this allows me, until we want to buy some huge combine with tracks, one way to do this easily, 60-inch on center rows. We take the duals off. I've got 20.8s on this combine, and I mirror my header with the drill. So I've got a 20-foot John Deere drill that we harvest, or we plant a lot of our wheat with. This mirrors that. The pads are in between. You can go on to the next slide. So it's very important that we do not harm the soybeans. Go on to the next slide here. You can see the pads down low pushing that down. So our wheel traffic is going into that wheat. We've got 40 inches of beans, it doesn't matter if they're really big, where we can go in there and precisely harvest the wheat with the pads, create a kind of a Ziploc seal with these wings, and works pretty well. Now, in different landscapes, and I want to experiment more on this idea. This is Mitchell Hora in Iowa. What he's doing is he's planting solid cereal rye. I think this is wheat here, lowering his rate. So if he plants 120 pounds, he might be at 30 or 40. So he's getting less plants, enough light to infiltrate, but with the allelopathic effect of rye, he's eliminating herbicide, and then you just harvest it right above. I think this system would be very handy with a stripper header, something like that. And also when we start looking at track combines with big draper heads, the less that you can run over, I think the system would work really well, especially if you have a market with cover crop seeds, things like that. If you get a premium, it doesn't put as much pressure on you to yield a lot on your cereal if you're getting 12 or 13 bucks a bushel for it. Continue on here. So this is right here in front of my house this year. And the thing you notice, we cut our seeding rate significantly where we have fertility. We're at about 30% seeding rate here. So we've got some big gaps between the plants, and we do that to temper the lodging. So we're empowering the plant to tiller, and when we get it to tiller and put it in the venue in wider rows, it is allowed to go out and morph and change how it grows and get more out of each plant. Continue on here. So I've modified many different ways to plant it. I can even plant crossways with big planter, but most of our acres get planted with an old anhydrous wing that are Robson Kinsey 2600 planting units, and these are adjustable. And we plant our soybeans on 19-inch twins with a 41-inch gap that straddle that wheat. The interesting thing, as you can see kind of where we're planting these soybeans, when we get dry, once the beans get up and they really start requiring any water, if you can continue the slides here, the wheat's really hogging the water right around that root ball, which can be a great thing with a lot of rain, but not a great thing when it gets dry. Go to the back slide and then look at this slide again. So this is a period of 3 weeks here. So we've got 60-inch wheat that's kind of growing. Go to the next one. Now look how that fills in. So in a 3-week time period, when a cereal is going through its vegetative mode, it is just going to conform to whatever row spacing that you put out there. Now, it's kind of like having a vicious dog on a leash. If I know my leash is 15 foot long, it's only going to go 18 feet before it comes and eats you. So I know that wheat can only stretch so far. So I want that gap in this system about 35 to 40 inches because it will fill in the row and shut off light to the beans. But it kind of does a really interesting thing at flowering. If you go to the next slide, it goes from, continue on here. These are a lot of different mechanisms I've used. That's my manure tanker there. Go ahead. But it will go upright at flowering. So I may have closed the row at the heavy vegetative stage. At flowering, it goes up. So at that point at flowering, if I plant my soybeans in April, my beans are starting to actively grow. They get plenty of light to grow regularly. John Kemp had me read a book called Plant Intelligence, and it really does make sense when you start doing this kind of stuff. The plant is always going off of the perception of how much light, water, and deciding how it wants to grow. So in a relay situation, if I place the beans so far away from the wheat, if I stuff them in there with a lot of cereals and they've got no light, it's going to grow spindly, and there's really no reason to do it. So if we're going to go solid, we really got to cut back rates, or we can go into this wide strip mentality, because we want both of these plants to have the perception that they have plenty of space to grow and get that genetic expression. If we continue on there. And you can see that pattern. It's cross-planted there. If you get on it early, before April 20th or so, you're really not going to cause much damage. It looks like my wheels really, TKO'd the wheat, but there's another 15 inches of growth that's going to come out of the ground, and it really doesn't matter if you get out there pretty early. Go ahead here. So this is what I'm talking about. So the wheat is actively vegging out, literally, as much light as possible. And look at our sun capture now. So not only am I up top, I'm getting sun capture on the sides. These are all tillers. And the interesting thing, when we go to flower, the stem is going to go out, up, up. And it kind of creates this shape. And I know I talk a lot about shapes, but it is very important on how your outcome at the end. We can continue on here. You can see heading starting to go upright. Look at the difference there between those two frames. This is, we go from a 5 or 10 inch gap back to about a 40-inch gap. And it's very important that these soybeans now come up and they're actively kind of stooling out and stacking the nodes. And if they're planted early, the thing that I've learned too, through my studies, we've done a spectrum analysis plot where we did early soybeans all the way into Arkansas soybeans, group 5s. And the later maturity soybeans, we see about 30 bushel yield increase by having an additional growing season in those soybeans. We can move on here. Keep going through here. And this is a picture I took just a few days before I left. This year in Indiana, we turned dry, and but we had pretty decent rain in April and May. And our relay wheat, I'm not going to sit up here and tell you lies, but I think it's going to go over 100, maybe 110, which consumes a lot of water. But the plant can flex, in many different ways. When you look at that corn plant putting on all those ears, it can also put a deeper kernel, it can put more kernels, it can put wider. There's like 3 or 4 different force multipliers. And when you lower the population of the cereal in the strips, and you get the tillering, and it gets the right conditions, then it's going to tell, it's going to create bigger heads, wider heads, and it's going to keep your standability up. So we went the wrong way. We went too thick, and we've had some interior lodging. We went too thin and not got much wheat yield. And we're kind of coming in on this okay, you've got, let's say you plant 7.5-inch wheat at a certain row population, in lighter soil, you may want to keep the same row population or slightly bump it up, but in your more fertile soil, lower the row population so you end up with 30-40% as much seed, which is what we have here. So you see the soybeans in here. And that, if you look at this graph, it doesn't matter if it's wheat or corn, it's going to have this same, and I thought this, I just pulled that off of Google. It shows 1990s hybrids, 1930s hybrids. The hybrids today are basically engineered to put as many of them out. You see that they're getting shorter, they're getting more upright, they're encouraging everyone to have multiple fungicide outs because there's no airflow. If you go backwards, you go back before interstates were even built, you know, we did check corn where you could cultivate it 3 or 4 different ways. You drop 2 or 3 on a hill, and the plant, if you wanted to get maximum yield, you needed a plant that could put on multiple years and kind of take care of the environment, or the environment around, took advantage of it. So this math, when you look at it from a graph standpoint, what we're trying to do is to milk the curve. If you look at this chalkboard, this blue line is your wheat yield based on spacing and population. And you know, you're going to see the same curve, whether it's corn or wheat. So let's say our optimum top yield is 36,000 corn seeds with ample rain. You know, we get 250 bushel corn, whatever it is. If we shave that back to 28,000, are we going to get 80% yield? No, we'll probably get 99% yield. We don't spend as much money on nitrogen, we don't have as many plants to feed, we have bigger stalks, more vigor. If we keep continuing on, this is never talked about at your agronomy meeting because they're trying to sell you all this stuff. If we shave it back half, go from 36 to 18, will we get half? No, we'll probably get 94% yield. What if we go back to a quarter? You're probably still at 65, 70% yield. And the point is, if we go back on this graph, we start widening the spacing, we put less seed out there, we're consuming less water, we're getting more rugged, bigger root mass plants. The only thing the plant cares about is how much CO2, water, and sunlight is available. So plants will conform. The thing that we need to look at is how does our planting population, our spacing, affect the other plant? And when we had 108 bushel soybeans, we went way back on this chart back here, where we're planting 15, 20% as much wheat, get 40 bushel, we have better soybeans. So we might actually create a venue. If we throw some cereal rye out there, we throw a small amount of cover crop where we get better crops. In an intercropping situation, this has been the last 8 years, okay, we're gonna go to wider spacing, we're gonna get maximum yield in this space, and if I get the soybean plant about 12 inches away from that root ball, we can create a venue where the soybeans can do just as good. So if I've got regular wheat that I'm raising 2 million, I put 140 pounds of nitrogen, I fungicide it 2 or 3 times, yes, I get awesome. I raised 117 bushel wheat, great. But I have 284 bucks in it, whatever it is. Can I go back and have 60 bucks in the crop and get 80% and then have another crop where I can ban my herbicide, I can have attributes that are better for soil health in the long term, get nearly the same yield, and aggregately, when we write everything on the chalkboard that we did for the wheat, everything we did for the soybeans, it's less than maybe even growing one crop of soybeans. That's what's really interesting here is we can use all these attributes to our advantage only if we change. So, you know, it's evolved where now if we had a hood sprayer, a way to hood spray, seed, and side dress in one pass, this would be a lot less work than our normal system. Go ahead. So just a picture. I'm pretty fascinated with our wheat heads this year. I just don't know what they're going to produce. But you see the big soybeans down here. This was a few days ago. Beans are blooming, and we've got nearly the same yield of wheat standing up. Go ahead. So I really want to learn with these plots, what is the dean, what is the tax. So right behind this plot at my house, I have regular soybeans, and then those regular soybeans go into that wheat. Now when you look at that previous picture and look at this picture, look at that wave that's created in those rows. And that's why I say, you can accomplish the same yield there. Go ahead. Next one here. And go past here. And this is right before I left. That's case there. Continue on. And this is a way of looking at that split. If you look at, and I get into this golden ratio quite a bit, but your splits in your trees are always going to be 1.618. The way your body is made, with your elbow, your arm, all these ratios are the same. If you think about the perception of plants, when we make those splits, and we make those splits off the splits, we change that architecture of the plant. And that's kind of the goal in the finish line, is to do that. We're genetically expressing 2 different crops at 2 different parts of the season. Continue on. And continue on. I always love to, it's probably my favorite thing besides side dressing tall corn, is harvesting the relay wheat. And I'll find that a lot of farmers, once they see me out there, they'll start parking at the end of the field. And some of them will stop, they'll be shaking their head. All this trash, you ruin your beans, and the next day, the beans kind of shake off the residue, and it's clean. But you get a lot of trash out there, but that is a great tool. Not only are we creating value with that cereal through weed suppression and all this stuff, but we're creating a huge thatch to preserve water. So when we reflect the light, all that trash is down low, so if we do get that 2 or 3 inch rain, and then the sun comes out, the wind blows, and it's 100 degrees, think about how much longer that moisture is going to stay on top of that soil for those really shallow root hairs that are just looking for, that moisture up top. Continue on here. And you see these pads a little bit better with this picture. This is kind of evolved. When we started, these are from Flexi Finger. They snap right onto the head. When I started, I put 2 of them together, but I couldn't really penetrate the wheat real well. It's kind of dragging the edges down. So we went to 1, and I made these little plastic wings on the side. So the front will go and penetrate into the wheat, and then the wings will actually push the wheat back, and it creates a complete Ziploc seal for my soybeans. So we're not running them over, we're not clipping it at all, we're throwing trash over the top. And even though it looks like they have a tough venue, there's no damage. They've got the strength and it's just beautiful the next day. You can go to the next slide here. This is me working on the combine, and I had harvested the inrows the day before. And think about the venue we're creating for those soybeans. And go ahead here. You see the wheel traffic here, right in between there. And this is kind of what we're left with when we leave. And there'll be a period of 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how big the beans are, before it locks back up. This always coincides when the soybean plant is going through flower, R1, R2, R3. So it's just magic to tell you the difference when you can open up that canopy for these nodes, the amount of pods. And when we get to harvest and continue on the slides, what we'll see by creating this venue, go on here, is that each node will have pods all over the place. So you have your first blooms, you've got pods going through senescence, and you might have small pods, and it does take another week or 2 for these beans to finally mature, because all the nodes are kind of open in business the entire growing season. So we change how that grows. This here on the left is our traditional double crop soybeans. We keep doing that because our seed guy keeps giving us free beans, and it works somewhat. These are our monocrop soybeans. So double crops, a lot of times we'll get between 7 to 11 nodes, depending on if we get them planted in June or July. Monocrops were usually 14, 15, 16 nodes. And then our relay is always at least +4, not +6 or +8, because that plant is literally, it's not getting a longer day, but it's got more energy. So we can take a plant, so I'll pick something in the book that's long maturity, tall vegetatively, and it'll take all that energy and it will condense the nodes. Whoops. Now we're off. Can you hear me? Okay. I guess we're yelling. Terry?
The other mic
Huh? Oh.
should be good.
All right.
Mic drop.
So we just changed how that grows, and so we consistently, if we get the rainfall, can grow better soybeans in this situation. Continue on. I'm going to get out of wheat and soybeans and get into how we change some other ideas here. So you can get some monsters out there if you get a little wheel traffic when you move the combine. If you break off 3 or 4, the one next to it, it's going to compensate. And we find plants with 1,000 pods. It's really interesting how far they can go. Big beans. And in 2019, when I was working with Don Equipment on developing this biochar fertilizer wheat seeder, we did 13 fields, some other farmers' fields, which was too much work to be honest with you, but it really proved that this system can go to unfertile ground, a lot of different venues. This is right outside of my local high school. I really enjoyed doing this project. If you go to the previous picture here, I'm kind of like the eye doctor. What do you like, left or right? But this was just a few weeks prior. We come in, harvest it, and go here to the next picture. It takes about 3 weeks for that to fill in. And from a weed pressure standpoint, there's a lot of things working for you. We're consuming the sunlight with our covers, our wheats, and our beans. We're zipping, we're expediting canopy closure quicker. But what I've noticed here, now that we've been doing this 8 years, I've got very large fields around my house, big 300, 400 acre fields. And one of the fields has had this relay system on it 4 different times in the 8 years. And the water hem pressure, you can literally look at the line of where the cereals were versus just the tight corn, or corn beans rotation and manure. So we really do, with the living roots and the cereals out there, you can really dynamically change those noxious summer weeds. But also from a water hemp standpoint, it kind of runs off of soil temperature. So if I've got a monocrop field and I'm doing either conventional or vertical till or even no-till, and I'm waiting for them beans to canopy, and the sun's out and it's 95 degrees, that soil is going to get 90, 100, 110 degrees, and that's what triggers all these noxious weeds. When we can get out ahead of it and think about capturing that sunlight, we're going to keep that soil cooler, and there's kind of a mechanism where when the soil doesn't get as hot, we just don't trigger those weeds that we don't want. And like I said before, it just feels like you have a lot more control when we get the big rainfall or the lack of rainfall and how we can establish our stand and how even the field can be and clean. So, I want to get into corn and beans and then enter grazing. Is there any questions regarding the wheat and soybeans or cereal and soybeans or anything like that? Yes, our rotation. Ideally, we're still only doing this on a couple hundred acres, but ideally we get into every 4-year period, but we like to put an earlier maturity corn out ahead of the wheat and set that up so we can plant earlier. It's mostly just corn, wheat, intercrop soybeans back to corn, so 3 crops in 2 years. Anything else? Yep.
On the yield, like some of the yield numbers?
Yeah.
Are you counting that as like a per acre yield?
Yes.
If you were to say have a full, if you were to fill the gaps in the roads,
Yes.
you need the same.
So that's what's awesome. What he said. So Brad Wingham filled this guy in Colorado, and if I go to the FSA office, You only have to say you planted half the rows. And they do this down in cotton country. And we're getting, I've done corn and all these different schematics, wheat, soybeans, and yeah, we're getting that yield per acre from those plants. Having the branches, the nodes, all that stuff adds up to less plants produce more of the same. Yep.
I'm not a plant guy, and I understand how you're protecting the beans, but what if you just clip the tips of the beans with that header going? Would that stimulate beans more?
It depends. You can really screw them up as well. The first year that I did, the second year, 2017, we didn't use the pads, and I cut a lot of them down, and they didn't really, you're cutting the growing point. So they'll produce a lot below what you cut. So you turn them into little midgets, basically. So you do want to protect them forward. Now, with a stripper header, you might be able to remove leaves and kind of emulate a hailstorm, but you've got the main stem and the growing point still engaged, so it can throw out new leaves. Yep.
Are the new cultivars that's available adaptable to your lower seeding rate operation?
What was the first part of that?
The cultivars that are available, are they adaptable to this lower seeding rate, higher row, wider row space situation?
So yeah, it's about the cultivars of wheat, different varieties. We've tried different varieties. We've kind of steered towards 25R74. I have found that, I do a lot of different hybrids in these venues. It doesn't really matter what. Now corn, some of them have more susceptibility to be more flexier or produce multiple years. But I've seen in the wheat, for me, it's usually a standability and timing issue. If I can keep it standing and harvest it maybe a little earlier, that's what we gravitate towards. But I've never done really studies to see, what wheat yields the most in these scenarios or how they behave, but they all behave differently with fertility and space and lower seed population at some point.
But they breed for higher density plantings, right? So you now cutting down on the seeding rates, and these things are all genetically going up like this, and you want them to go wide.
Yeah, but they're all going to go wide in the life cycle of the vegetative, and then they go upright at flower. All of them are. That's interesting. But also there's a physics standpoint where each 3 to 5 bushels of wheat will extract 1 acre inch of water. So if I'm selling this as a commodity and I'm getting $6 for wheat, and I raise 110 bushel wheat but 30 bushel beans, if I can shave that back to 60 and get 60 of the other, economically I raise this cheaper and I got more of the higher priced commodity. So that's kind of part of the math there as well, where good can hurt you. That makes much sense. I don't know if I answered your question there. Anything else? This is soft red winter wheat, is what we grow. But I think this system would work with triticale, barley, what have you, pretty well. A lot of people use rye. So I'll move on to corn and soybeans. And we share the same growing season with it, but looking at the surface, what's interesting is your soybeans, as you know, are legumes, so they're producing nitrogen. Can we tap into that for the corn? And can we kind of tap into this slope curve, if you will? So we've done this a lot of different ways. This is a picture of Zach Smith's farm in Iowa. And this plot here, he applied 0 nitrogen to his corn. And, his winning entry, he had 90-inch corn, he had 60, and then he had 60-inch gap. Was low population 60-inch corn. If you go to the previous picture or the next one, kind of see how they change with population. Go to the previous before that. Yeah, here we go. So this is the low population 60. And I met a man named James Bates back in 2016. He was a plant breeder in Hawaii, Puerto Rico. They would let him find a hybrid and then they populate or whatever. And what he found was that his plants would wilt in the afternoon, and he started messing with shade fabric and then cardboard boxes. And then he started doing, and went on this rabbit hole of 100-100, where he was trying to raise 100 bushel corn and soybeans in the same space. And what it kind of got to is putting gaps in corn. And this is something I've messed with. And I think a lot of this stuff is going to be super relevant, whether we have autonomous robots or something like that. If we can make things small and autonomy, then the edge effect and polyculture will run away with anything aside from our compost feeds and things like that. But interesting here is we lower the population. Now we trigger these multiple years for corn, but now we have left light down for the soybeans. And if we start putting gaps in there, so you go 60, you plant 2 or 3 plants, you put a 2 or 3 foot gap, and then you stair step the gaps on the other thing. There's a slide in here if we move on here. We can start messing with how we deal with sun and shade. I kind of made an open discussion on Twitter about the idea of smoke hurting our yield, and John Kemp came on and said, you know, plants can only take in a third of how much direct sunlight is, so it might not hurt. So if we can start looking at this, what we can start doing, act like these Legos on the corn plant. As the sun changes position through the day from sunset to sunrise, it's going to change the shadows, and they're just going to walk throughout the field. So I can get plenty of ambient and direct light to the ground floor, and I can change the shadows, and I can make the shadow just kind of like a relief for the plant to kind of catch its breath. And I think this is really interesting when we look at our cover crop mixes, you know, getting big, diverse, really low population things out there, ground floors. But in corn and soybeans, when I look at the economics, again, we've got hurdles of seed separation and things. But I think we can start, if we wanted to, raise 5, 6, 7,000 population corn, 2 or 3 or 4 plants in a row with large gaps. We could spot in starter, compost tea, or whatever to get the plant a competitive advantage. And then it pretty much lives off the soybeans. It doesn't need much nitrogen. And you can grow 100, 120 bushel corn on really low population. And the beautiful thing is the beans will not get done at all. So we've been kind of dealing with that spectrum. But if you go to the previous slide, you know, this is probably more of an interesting way to grow corn. If you follow Eric Miller, 60-inch corn guy on Twitter, he's been doing this the last 5 or 6 years, continuous corn. He's planting twin 60s. So a lot of the research in 60-inch corn kind of concedes that there's somewhere between a 10 to 5% yield drag with the same amount of plants down the road. Basically, we're putting them every 2 or 3 inches and they kind of run into each other. But he has done a diamond pattern on 60, and he's getting as good or maybe even slightly better corn yield from the ancillaries of airflow through there. All the leaves are engaged. And what he's doing is awesome. He's putting 17 variety cover crop mix that's going to produce nitrogen and also be a good forage for his cattle. He's harvesting the corn, you know, lowers the seeding population down slightly. He's got all this forage to put his mama cows out there, and then he'll come in and plant the corn for next year right into where he produced nitrogen. And if you follow, I've mentioned John Kemp several times up here, but you know, he talks a lot about organic nitrogen, growing our own nitrogen, and its effects on water and energy in that plant, converting that ion into energy versus growing your own nitrogen. So when we get into these drier years, this is going to create much more resilient plants that's going to get through drier spells. And I'm really interested in converting all of our acres either into twin 60 or a 20-40 inch schematic that not only could we get covers to grow, but we could side dress manure, we could plant wheat in this space just the same. There's a man named Joe Stroman that is planting this plus wheat in 4 rows. So he's grazing it, the broadleaves in winter kill, and he's left with a cereal that he then interseeds soybeans. And the reason he did that, he's further north. He's deep into Minnesota. and he's making my system work with the one change of growing the 4 rows of wheat. So you just got to kind of look at what you're doing on your farm. How can we change these rows, these schematics? How can we get them started to do some interesting things and start eliminating these costs? If you can continue on here. Keep going. So that's my gap corn. Very interesting stuff there. This is a short little video inside those gaps. If you could play that and just go back and play that. You can kind of see how we changed the plants and how you could get to plants. The last year on Zach's field day, we did a lot of studying on ear counts and yield, and then he went to yield, and I think he got 220 bushel corn on 60 inch, and his beans were in the 60s, so it's totally doable. Go ahead and continue on here. So, me and Zach, Joe, some of these guys that think the same have been kind of messing with these commodities, and it's fun, but how could we kind of use this thought to create products for the community? So if you can continue on this slide, in 2020, let's sit on this slide, I'll go on. In 2020, we had the coronavirus, and we were kind of shut off, and it coincided with us purchasing a property that we had organic acres. And this was kind of the drawing board going into that organic farm of having precision grazing. So instead of trying to grow two commodities and figuring out how they ding each other, what if we empowered this edge effect on corn and then fed the corn to the animals and then created forage for the animals to impact several times, and then basically close the loop where the corn feeds the animals, the livestock is slaughtered and fed the community, and you kind of create this perpetual system. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts and the dorky math inside baseball about stock cropping. So if we really want to get nearly all our yield back, we can start creating these big gaps. You look at corn, something like this, 4 rows. The outside rows, we can bump the population up, maybe mid-40s, plant a shorter corn. The center, lower population, taller corn, now we're creating that arc. And now we can impact with a movable chicken tractor, different animals to graze that forage. And if we can get something like BMR sorghum to grow 5 foot tall, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 times in the growing season, because just like my kid peeing on that corn plant, you get the organic phosphorus and nitrogen and the ding. It's really interesting how much biomass we can create and what that equates to on the energy for the next year's crop. If you can go into the slide here. So this was that attempt, the 2020. I had 2 interns. We made 14 chicken tractors and cheap Alcatraz is what we call them. And we went out there and moved these things 2 or 3 times using this good old motor right here. And it was very exciting in my head because I had this fear that I was going to have this uncontrollable weed problem, just being new to organic. But we found that if we had hemp and we had corn, and you can see the chicken tractors there in the back. If you can progress the next slide, that's that BMR growing out. When you go to the next one, and then this is the impact, continue on, of those animals. So with something like a BMR, sorghum sudan grass, they're eating that high bricks leaf tips. They're chewing it down to the stalk, but the beautiful thing about corn or BMR is it's got that twirl inside. So as soon as the stem came out and it came out of the twirl, I had these big voluptuous leaves. So I could quickly grow back a cover to feed the animals. So we would take the sheep and we would ding it when it got about this high, and then we would wait about 5 days for the chickens because the sheep would take a crap and then the flies would come in and we'd have the larvae that kind of created a fun environment for the chickens. But we just kept tapering it down with the animals, and just by its proximity with the sheep, we allowed their necks to go out of the hog panel so they could get out and their neck, use their tongue, and they could literally clean every bit of cover crop right up to the corn. And as the corn got bigger, they started eating the lower leaves, and eventually we just let all the sheep just frolic and eat all the lower leaves and the BMR later in the growing season. Pretty interesting when we started engaging animals. Move on from here. So that was a lot of work, but it did work. So the next winter, with my project and Zach over in Iowa was making this real heavy stock cropper, we got together to try to figure out how we could automate this concept and idea to scale it across more acres. If you can continue on here. So there's a sheep let go. There's Zach in Iowa. He's got his first original stock cropper. Then he followed behind with his chicken coop in between corn. Continue on here. And go to the next slide. And that's me, Zach, and Joe. Roll on. And stock cropper nano is built. If you can move on. So what we're doing here is Zach had, one of his principles was to collect rainwater. So inverted roof. So we get over a ½ inch of rainfall. All of it is funneled into water tanks. You'll find that if your forage has quite a bit of water in it, the sheep really don't drink much, so you get it from the forage. You put pigs, ideally you put goats and sheep up front, pigs in the center, chickens behind, where we've done just the ruminants and the chickens thus far. So we're collecting rain. We also have a solar panel or two up top. So think about this. When we go back to that industrial mindset of my grandpa loved to death, but he needed that Detroit to farm faster than anyone. He needed horsepower. How many bob and plow could you pull with a solar panel driven? 0. I mean, you go like nowhere. But what if you take something like a solar panel or wind or whatever, you store it in a low battery, and you take that energy and you move several different livestock forward. When I move them forward into the new pasture, I'm engaging the sheep, the goats, the pigs, the chickens. They're all using their talons, they're scratching around. And this small amount of energy and engagement, let the livestock eat the pasture, convert it into manure and urine. The edge of the rows were empowered with more light, with just a small amount of energy. Problem is, with something like this, we need RTK, we need wheel motors. So we're figuring out how to hack these principles down, and we're coming out with a new concept called home plate, where we basically just have a casing and a time winch and a rolling system that I learned from my landscape days. So the module runs on rollers on the bottom, we pull it through the crop, and our idea is to have a lot of homeowners with land and convert areas that they had previously mowed into eggs and garden vegetables and such. This concept move forward from here. So we have this out at our field day 3 years ago, and since we've done several alterations, iterations to make this cheaper, lighter. We're just trying to find that spot where it works for the market. Continue on here. Keep going to, there's the inverted roof and solar panel. And, with a smaller system, we would need a much smaller, like an energizer for a fence that could just run that winch. And I think we can hack this thing down to next to nothing, put it in a cardboard box and sell it on Amazon for one day. So, continue on here. And this was our demonstration. And if you go to either type twins or single row corn, there's a couple different thought processes here, but if you just have one row of corn or something, you can literally get 0 herbicide, 0 fertilizer situation by just moving those animals in between. And it worked well in our little demonstration last year. If you can go forward here. And here's a video of this working out. And I absolutely love this. She'll play this video. There's a video at Zach's field day, and there's a little 16-month kid just watching the sheep as it moves, and now have before, so sheep go from just sitting, taking a nap, they know it's moving, they know it's feeding time, they'll walk out and they'll just eat as hard as they can for an hour or two until they pretty much mow it all down. And that's just kind of, you know, if you think about this system, see, we're moving all these animals at once at the speed of smell, probably slower than the speed of smell. Trying to make a 10-foot move in a period of about 5 minutes. So it is very slow. We've created kind of a chicken fluffer situation. The chickens are they don't really have big brains, so you can run over them. And it turns on and it'll kind of just slap them a little bit. That's going to help that out. Think about that. If I can move these animals every 2 hours, so if I'm moving them at 8 in the morning, 10, noon, 2, 4, 6, 8, I'm moving 10 foot at a time. I'm moving 6 times a day. That's 60 feet. Over the course of 10 days, it's 600 feet. You can start getting across a big landscape. We've got a lot of different sizes and shapes of this. Zach's got a wick system. What's that? Okay, sorry. Long-winded here. So, I love this principle. I feel like we're on the chalkboard of something amazing. It's just figuring out how we build it to scale it. And, we can take the little bits and pieces of this with polywire and such and accomplish the same thing. So, a couple minutes. Any questions regarding precision grazing or yep?
Serious question, do you have trouble sleeping at night? Or do you shut your brain down?
No, I sleep well. I sleep like a rock.
I have the opposite. I get thinking about this stuff and stuff. I can't. There's nights I just I think I get up and
Yeah.
do something. I can't shut it off. And I'm not as deep thinker as you.
Well, but all this stuff, the main takeaway, all of this stuff, seriously, small, cheap, and gain confidence in how it works. And everything to me is like, okay, I have a new idea. Let's try it on this little corner in the garden. Let's study it. Let's do it 10 different ways. Let's kind of create chaos. And you don't realize how much value is created by putting your truck in park, getting out of your truck, walking, not thinking about what was on Fox News, CNN, or whatever, but actually like being engaged, being in the moment, thinking, journaling, put an idea out in the world if you don't think it's right, put yourself open for criticism, express yourself. All right, take it back.